to start with, the circumstance we're in is not good, obviously, and it's pretty rapidly getting worse. We hear that daily now. I don't know if you watched the news this morning, where the Boise mayor with several of the healthcare representatives talking about their circumstances. That was clearly reflected in the data that Kim just shared with you all. And I came up with this idea of a public health advisory as a means to try to find the right balance between the communities who we serve, who are pretty opposed to the orders. I know Chairman Nettleton, you mentioned our visits in Elmore County, and the message I guess I got pretty loud and clear from those visits is they want us to tell them what they need to do, but not do it by way of order. So this is definitely a different approach. We have used advisories in the past when things come up with a waterborne illness, for example, during the summer at recreational waters. We issue public health advisories telling people you shouldn't swim in that pond or that lake. So this is again, it's not our typical approach, but it's something that I at least wanted to offer to the board as a suggestion. So an advisory is not an order. There are strong recommendations by Central District Health to reduce risk in specific areas. Like I mentioned, foodborne outbreaks, waterborne outbreaks. This is the first time in 100 years we've had a pandemic, so I don't know exactly how applicable it is, but again, it's looking at giving our communities guidance on exactly what we believe they need to do to protect themselves, their neighbors, and their loved ones, and in the case of this pandemic, to ensure we can all continue to have access to health care over the coming months. So the order, before I get into it, I'm going to have Dustin pull it up here in a second, is that it's a combination of what our disease investigators are seeing in our community, and that includes the contact tracers, where people who are getting the disease are being exposed. It also includes the high-risk environments and activities that are likely to spread a respiratory virus. And it also includes recommendations intended to protect high-risk populations, such as those living in congregate facilities. It does not change the existing CDH public health orders that we have in place for Ada and Valley counties, or the orders that the Governor Little just issued. So those remain in effect. They are law, and violation of the orders are subject to a misdemeanor citation. So Dustin, could you pull up the proposed public health advisory? Okay.
That these recommendations move over to public health orders that then incur the misdemeanor?
Madam Chair, this is Russ. So, yeah, we'll talk about that after I go through the specific recommendations, but that's the idea is, you know, people generally want to know at what time, what point does the advisory get lifted? And in most instances, like I described, that would happen when the threat is gone. It passes or was mitigated or resolved. However, in this situation, I am fully expecting, based on what we're seeing, that it's going to go the other direction. And that was the trigger point for these recommendations to become an order. And clearly there'll have to be more discussion about that, and maybe it needs to be worded a little bit different, but the recommendations would be written into an order, and then those would have to be approved by the board before they took effect.
Madam Chair? Yes, Megan, go ahead. Yeah, what was written. My understanding is what the recommendations were written with an order to follow regardless of board involvement. I'm just trying to clear that up, please, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, this is Russ. Yeah, we can change the wording at the bottom of this public health advisory to make that clear if the board wants CDH to go ahead and proceed with this advisory. I do see your point. It doesn't clarify the process, but the process is for board approval before any orders would go into effect.
Anna?
Yes, Diana, go ahead.
So, I had a little bit opposite reaction to that section at the end, which is, public health's role is to prevent the spread of infectious disease and is to ensure access to safe and quality care. If we get to a place where people like my husband have to decide who is getting access to care, we've already failed. So I struggle with saying it doesn't become an order until crisis standards of care, and literally having to decide who gets care at the hospital. I struggle with that, and I would actually, we're talking about advisory today, but I prefer to head down a path where we discuss what is the next metric to look at further orders in Ada County and maybe our other counties. We can't do it all here. We heard from Dr. Souza when he was on a few weeks ago that I don't know that even us alone would be enough, but certainly we are the largest populace. So I guess I would just offer that as commentary that I'm uncomfortable with saying we aren't doing more until there's crisis standards of care.
Madam Chair, this is Ted.
Yes, Ted, go ahead.
I think we, because of the questions that were asked right in the middle of Russ's presentation, we jumped to the end. I would like for Russ to be able, uninterrupted, to be able to finish what the advisory is. And the reason is that there are a lot of people watching this that are getting pretty scared by this latter conversation. Let's go through the advisory, what's in it, and then we can discuss the action steps.
Okay, Madam Chair, I'll continue. And again, the points that were just made, totally understand, and we'll talk about that, and certainly I'll provide you my opinion when we get to that point. So, the advisory that you see in front of you is for the counties of Ada, Boise, Elmore, and Valley. So in Boise County and Elmore County, we currently have no public health orders in effect at this time. Clearly, they are being impacted by COVID, pretty much at a very similar rate as to what we're seeing here in Ada County, but a much smaller population overall. So those are the counties we serve, and that's why I am recommending this advisory be issued for all 4 of our counties. So, as you can see, I'm not going to go through these in great detail, but basically, to start, you see individuals toward the bottom of the page. We recommend face covering at all times around anyone who is not a member of your household when physical distancing of at least 6 feet cannot be maintained. So that's definitely more strict, if you want to call it strict, compared to the Valley County and Ada County orders where it's public places and schools and so on. But there should be no exceptions to this at this time, given our current circumstances, other than, as CDC has noted, for children younger than age 2, people who have trouble breathing, and people who cannot remove the mask without assistance, and then also people who are getting services like dental services where you obviously can't wear a mask at that time. Dustin, can you scroll down to the next page? We are strongly recommending that people work from home. Work from home when you can. Minimize non-essential travel. Suspend visits to congregate living facilities. We only have orders in Ada County that address congregate living facilities and the criteria that must be met. We also included a recommendation that when we have a positivity rate greater than 10%, the visit should be suspended, and as Kim just described a short while ago, we're well above that. So that would be for, again, all 4 counties. It include pretty much jails, prison, long-term care facilities. Avoid social gatherings, and I'm not recommending a number. People need to avoid social gatherings, period, including among family members who are not part of your household. And I know this is a really tough message to deliver at this time as we're coming upon the holiday season, but we see case after case after case of family gatherings spreading the disease from one household to another, and then of course within the household themselves. We have information on our website on how to celebrate the upcoming holidays and do it safely. Anyone age 65 and older, or who smokes, or with a health condition that puts them at risk for severe outcomes should avoid close contact with anyone other than immediate household members except for necessary services such as health care. And you can see in the open bullet below that, this is from Centers for Disease Control. These are the folks who will face the most severe consequences should they contract the disease. So then on to the next section, we have outings and activities in places of businesses. Businesses should implement delivery and curbside services when possible. And again, I understand that's not always feasible. What I'm advising at this time is if you can do it, you should do it. Places of worship should implement virtual services. And once again, I understand that not everyone would have access to the technology, but that's generally they're in a large gathering and in close contact for a prolonged period of time. Discontinue youth and adult sports activities in which physical distancing is not possible. Kim shared with me a day or two ago over 25 instances where fairly recently we've had outbreaks or clusters occurring within youth sports. And this just is not just school associated, but also with club sports. They're clearly high risk with the respiratory virus, and the idea of wearing a face covering when you're playing basketball or wrestling, it's just not going to happen. Discontinue school extracurricular activities of all types in which physical distancing cannot be maintained. So this really speaks to the school activities and where physical distancing can be maintained. And I want to again make this clear, where there's increased breathing, such as choir and band. There's been a number of cases across the country where there's fairly significant outbreaks occurring in those environments, even when physical distancing can be maintained because of the large production of respiratory droplets doing those activities. Bars, restaurants, breweries, tap rooms, wineries, and distilleries should move to takeout, carry out only and close at 10 p.m. Again, it's a strong recommendation, and I understand bars, for example, make a lot of their revenue after 10 p.m. But we're in very near a crisis situation, and these are steps that I think are absolutely necessary so that you can stay open, but also help the community contain the disease in environments where we know it will spread. And the last item is gyms and other fitness or group exercise facilities and studios should limit their capacity to no more than 50%. I know a lot of the businesses out there, including bars, restaurants, breweries, and so on, have done a really good job with physical distancing, but we really need to step this up. So the idea is to reduce the capacity In those environments, again, people go to gyms to exercise, you increase your breathing, respiratory droplets, etc. And then class instructors need to maintain a distance of at least 6 feet from participants at all times. We've had an instance where the class instructor was in very close contact with the class participants, even though the class size was limited, but close contact and a loud voice caused, again, a small outbreak to occur. So this is just based on what we're seeing and what we know of as high-risk environments. So the duration of the advisory, which is the conversation that we started a little bit earlier, is that it will remain in effect until a sustained 2-week decline in cases within our health district occurs and a 2-week case rate of less than 30 per 100,000 per day. Now, a good question to ask is, well, why 30? Where do you come up with that number? Well, we came up with a number, and it's, I would call it an educated guess of 20 per 100,000 per day. And Kim certainly advised me a number of times as far as, well, what that looks like with 20 per 100,000 per day over that 2-week period might not be a significant impact to the hospitals. But if you don't start to throttle things back at that point in time, they'll continue to burn out of control. And as she described, where you're looking at 70 per 100,000 per day with no slowing in sight, that's exactly what happened. So that was really tied to our recommendations around schools and the Idaho Back to School framework. So I think this is not only to see the decline, but we need to be under that 30 per 100,000 per day to feel comfortable where we wouldn't have to have the advisory in place, or at least some provisions of it. Then the last part, which I get, I don't know exactly what is that perfect point of when our communities who prefer not to have orders in place, when will that be tolerated? So that is when one of our 3 health systems, St. Luke, St. Al's, or the Boise VA, implement crisis standards of care, and those are authorized by the state of Idaho. It's not just the hospitals saying we're in crisis, but actually a formal process that this advisory would be moved over into the format of an order. And again, my thought on that is it would be clearly too late to slow it down. It would take us several weeks, and what I would envision happening is we would end up at stay-home orders like we had issued on March 25th. So, some members of our community seem to still want to debate the effectiveness of masks, but I don't think anyone in our community will tolerate our health systems being forced to decide who gets care and who does not. Last thing I just want to say, this is my plea to our communities, as we are heading into the most dangerous time of year for respiratory illness, COVID aside. Now we have COVID on top of everything else. Colder weather moves people indoors. The upcoming holidays are a time for gathering with family and friends. And it's the exact thing we want to avoid to slow the spread of coronavirus. So we really need all hands on deck right now and for the next couple of months. I know the vaccine's on its way, but it's going to be several months before it's readily available to the broader community. Likely it'll be spring and possibly as far out as early summer. So that is my presentation on the public health advisory. Again, I don't know that I feel overly comfortable with that approach, but again, it's trying to find that right balance between issuing orders that in a lot of instances aren't actually being enforced anyway. And this particular document spells out exactly what we need to do as a community to try to slow the spread. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Revit?
Madam Chair, this is Ted.
Yes, go ahead.
First, Russ, I think you and your staff have done an outstanding job on taking a very serious situation and boiling this down into specific behaviors that the community can do. I like the approach of a strong advisory at this time as opposed to mandates and orders. I hope it's enough to catch the attention of the community. One issue that the advisory was silent on, and this is my question to you, Russ, was around schools and the potential of advice or an advisory to the schools in regards to online virtual training. I'm sure you've given that a lot of thought and had a lot of conversations. Could you share with the board and the community why that wasn't contained in the advisory as well?
Madam Chair, Russ? Yes, Dr. Erpoli, and that is something we definitely discussed on a number of occasions, both internally, talking with our schools, school administration, school superintendents, Idaho State Board of Education, trying to figure out what is the right step. As everyone may remember, back in July, when the Idaho Back to School Framework was put together, it said specifically when you get to red or category 3, there were 3 categories at the time, schools should go virtual. So now that we're a few months into school, our schools, we know, have really good plans that they've implemented. And the bottom line is what it comes down to, the question, are kids going to be safer outside of the school in an uncontrolled environment where they may be staying with grandparents to try to learn virtually, or gathering with, I've heard of families who maybe one parent will take multiple children to help them with virtual learning. They go to child care facilities, or in the case of the older kids, there's been, I'd say, an extreme amount of concern for them failing. And again, failing and COVID are 2 different issues, but they're both significant health issues and public health issues, looking further down the road. So the bottom line is, the question that actually one of the school superintendents asked me is, Russ, do you feel confident that kids moved out of the school setting for 6-7 hours a day out into the community will slow the spread, or won't it? And my answer is, I don't know. And in fact, I don't think it would, because our schools have been great partners in this effort. They have the kids physically distanced, they have them in pods, so if there is an exposure, they don't expose multiple other kids. They wear face coverings, and when somebody tests positive, they're not allowed into school, and they've been actually helping with contact tracing because we have so many cases. So I know that was a long explanation, but I think the bottom line is, as the public health director for Central District Health, I couldn't assure our schools or our communities or this board that our kids would be any safer outside of the school setting. In fact, I would question the fact that they probably could even become more likely to be spreading the disease, given that they're in that uncontrolled environment 7 days a week, whereas otherwise they have at least 3 or 4 or 5 days in the school where they have some oversight.
Thank you, Russ.
Thank you for that explanation, Russ. I think that'll be very helpful to the community to hear the thinking.
Madam Chair, this is Al.
Yes, Al, go ahead.
So Russ, would you kind of guesstimate, I know it's not our call, it's the governor's call, but this is like the last step before we go back to stage 1?
Madam Chair, Russ. Yeah, Commissioner Hasbrook, I know our communities really kind of became accustomed to that stay home order, stage 1 through stage 4. In fact, when you recall, when we issued our first set of orders here, we were aligning them with stage 3, and then moved away from that because our orders look quite different. And even the governor moving back to earlier stages, it comes with modifications. So I don't know what the governor is going to do next. I know he's hopeful that his recent changes will turn the situation and start us in a downward trend for cases. But if it doesn't happen, I would envision, like you said, stage 1, and ultimately, if the hospitals are impacted, as some are predicting, I'm not sure we'll have any other choice but to look at stay-home orders. And I'm not saying the governor or us specifically, but we're going to have to work on this as a community and get this figured out. Because as you all know, when our neighboring public health districts have no restrictions in place at all, those folks still come to our community for health care. So we really need to figure out a plan to work on this together. And I think the statewide approach is better, and especially where you're seeing the COVID cases pretty much in every county in our state on the increase.
Brian, go ahead.
So I want to sort of pick up on the schools issue, and this is where having these weekly meetings is so important that we can voice the questions that we get. Boise Schools has decided that after Thanksgiving they're going virtual, and it largely does not have to do with COVID. It doesn't have to do with COVID transmission in school at all. It has to do with the amount of staff being impacted and their lack of ability to get substitutes. We're hearing the same concerns in West Ada. They haven't gotten there yet, but they have tons of people out on quarantine. And so the question that I keep hearing and getting, and I certainly think about this as well, if we want schools to be a priority and we want kids to be in school because we know it's a safer place, we know it's better for families, for the economy, for mental health, for all the things, then again, this is the question I keep asking, what do we need to do to prioritize that? And I'm hearing a lot of frustration from parents that bars are open, restaurants are open, things are happening in the community, whilst now we're back to virtual school in Boise. So what's your hot take on that, Russ?
Madam Chair, Russ. Yeah, Commissioner LaSciondo, I hear the concerns. We've really, I feel like we've done our best, both in public health, the Board of Health, trying to move us back to what we call the new normal, at least the new normal for a while. Bars, for example, they came to the board, they petitioned the board, they had a plan where they specifically described how they were going to operate, table seating only, bar tops closed, face coverings for staff, face coverings for patrons. So it's hard to argue like, well, you should stay closed even though you're operating just like a restaurant. Now, granted, I know there were a few out there because we did spot checks, and they'll be getting letters in the mail any day now because they were sent out yesterday with clear, blatant disregard for following the orders. So, it's definitely desirable to try to figure out an approach where you have people that are trying to do the right thing and that are actually doing the right thing and not essentially penalizing them for the bad actors out there. Now, obviously it doesn't seem to be working. I think we have so much activity going on in our communities. You think back to what it looked like in end of March and April compared to today, it's hard to tell that there's a pandemic going on. Now, when I say that, I do think I live in Boise, and I think people are really trying to do the right thing. When I stop at a grocery store or a hardware store, most people are wearing face coverings, and I'm really impressed by what I'm seeing with the staff at these facilities. So I don't know, what to say to a parent of a student of Boise School District, other than everything I just covered in that public health advisory. That actually does include the celebrations, the school celebrations, the family gatherings that you get together that includes school-age children. It's not, like you pointed out, we're not seeing a flood of cases coming out of occurring within the school, but it occurs within the school community, or teachers, or staff, or bus drivers getting together. So like I mentioned, we just need a community-wide effort, and I don't think right now is the time to maybe place blame on one particular business or industry or individual. I just think we need to do the things we've been talking about forever, and like I outlined in the public health advisory, I think if our communities in all 4 counties follow those strong recommendations, it's my sincere hope that we'll see a decline in cases in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you, Russ.
Deanna, this is Ted. I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Russ, again, I think this is well done, well thought through. It's level-headed, it's practical. We've got behaviors that are identified for an advisory. You've got clear data in terms of how long it lasts. You have an exit strategy in terms of number of cases per 100,000 at 30. We're right now sitting at about 60 on our way to 73. So it sounds like we might be here a while. And it also has an escalation from advisory to becoming a public health order if things just, the bottom falls out and the public just doesn't pay attention. So because of the good work here, I make a motion that we accept and approve Director Duke's advisory orders to include Ada, Boise, Elmore, and Valley counties.
Okay, the motion has been made. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that,
Would
Mrs.
I-
Taylor.
Madam
I'm
Chair,
sorry, who's-
Representative Blakeman,
Yes, go ahead.
I would just ask that we have the opportunity to review it before it becomes an actual order. I don't know that I disagree with the recommendation, but if it becomes an actual order, I think that should maybe come back to the board.
I would agree.
Thank you. Was there, Diana, was that you seconding the motion?
It was, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, point of order, I would just say that, Dr. Epperly would have to amend his, motion to say that it has to come back to the board before it becomes an order, and he would also have to have the agreement of the second.
Okay, Ted, would you do that, please?
Yes, Betty Ann, I would be happy to add that. I think that was implied, but I will absolutely make that clear that this is an advisory set of orders. We would not escalate this to become a public health order in regards to that it's advisory at this point.